The dusty leather satchel sat open on the narrow bed, half filled with the few possessions Tabitha Emerson could claim as her own, and the lamp beside it flickered against the pre-dawn darkness of her rented room above the Wheatland Mercantile. She folded another worn cotton dress with trembling fingers, thinking about how she would slip away before the sun painted the Wyoming sky pink. Before anyone could ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Before her employer's unwanted advances became something she couldn't escape. The decision to leave had crystallized 3 nights ago when Mr. Henderson had cornered her in the storage room, his whiskey-soured breath hot against her cheek as his hands grabbed at her waist, and only the timely interruption of a late customer had saved her from something worse. At 22 years old, Tabitha had learned that a woman alone in 1882 had precious few choices, and staying in Wheatland was no longer one of them. She had come to this small Wyoming town 6 months earlier, stepping off the Union Pacific with nothing but hope and a letter of introduction from her aunt in Philadelphia. Her parents had died within weeks of each other the previous winter, consumption taking them both, and the boarding house where she had grown up working alongside her mother had been sold to pay their debts. Her aunt's letter had secured her a position keeping books for Henderson's general store, and for a while, Tabitha had allowed herself to believe she might build something resembling a life here. The work was honest, the pay modest but steady, and the room above the store was small but clean. She had even begun to enjoy the vast openness of the Wyoming landscape, so different from the cramped Philadelphia streets of her childhood. But Mr. Henderson had changed everything. His wife had died the previous year, and somewhere in his grief and loneliness, he had decided that Tabitha's presence in his store meant something it did not. The first time he touched her shoulder and let his hand linger too long, she told herself she had imagined the impropriety. The second time, when he stood too close while reviewing the account books, she made excuses. But 3 nights ago had shattered any illusion of safety. She couldn't afford to wait and see if he would try again, if next time there would be no customer to interrupt, no escape. The stage to Cheyenne left at noon, and she planned to be on it with enough head start that Henderson wouldn't know she was gone until the store opened at 8. From Cheyenne, she would figure out her next move. Perhaps she could find work in a hotel, or maybe continue east back to Philadelphia, though the thought of returning felt like admitting defeat. She tucked her mother's silver-backed brush into the satchel, one of the few things she had managed to keep when everything else was sold. The brush had been a wedding gift to her mother, and Tabitha could still remember sitting between her knees as a child while her mother worked through the tangles in her hair with patient, gentle strokes. A sound from outside made her freeze. Footsteps on the external wooden stairs that led up to her room. Heavy boots, deliberate and unhurried. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she glanced at the door, which had only a simple latch. She had told no one of her plans to leave. Henderson shouldn't be awake at this hour. The Mercantile didn't open for hours yet. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Tabitha held her breath, pressing one hand against her chest as if she could quiet her racing heart through sheer will. A long moment of silence stretched out, filled only with the sound of wind whistling through gaps in the building's weathered boards. Then came a soft knock, so quiet she almost thought she had imagined it. "Miss Emerson." The voice was male but not Henderson's. Younger, with a rough edge that suggested years of outdoor living. "I know it's early and I apologize for the intrusion, but I need to speak with you. It's important." Tabitha didn't move. She didn't recognize the voice, which meant nothing good. Strange men didn't knock on unmarried women's doors before dawn with honorable intentions. "My name is Reese Sullivan," the voice continued. I work the cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town. I was making a delivery to the hotel kitchen and saw your lamp burning. I wouldn't trouble you except I just came from the saloon, and I overheard Henderson talking to some men. Miss Emerson, I think you might be in danger." The mention of Henderson's name made her stomach clench with fear. She moved quietly to the door but didn't open it, speaking through the thin wood. "What kind of danger?" "The kind that means you should leave sooner rather than later," Reese Sullivan said. His voice was low and urgent. "He was drinking heavy and talking about how you belong to him, how you've been teasing him and playing hard to get. He said something about coming up here before sunrise to settle things once and for all." "Miss, I don't know what's between you two, but the way he was talking and the men he was with, I got a bad feeling." Tabitha's blood ran cold. She had hoped leaving before dawn would be early enough, but if Henderson was already awake and drinking and making threats, she had less time than she thought. She could hear the sincerity in this stranger's voice, but she had learned the hard way that trusting men could be dangerous. Still, the alternative was waiting here alone for Henderson to make good on whatever he had planned. "Why would you help me?" she asked through the door. "You don't know me." There was a pause, and when Reese Sullivan spoke again, his voice was quieter. "My sister was in a situation like this once, back in Texas. A man who wouldn't take no for an answer. She tried to handle it herself, tried to be proper and not make a fuss. He killed her for it. So when I hear a man talking the way Henderson was talking tonight, I don't walk away and mind my own business. Not anymore." The raw pain in his words convinced her more than any protestation of honor could have. Tabitha unlatched the door and opened it a crack, peering out at the man on the other side. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, she could make out his features. Tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore typical ranch hand clothes, dusty and worn but clean, and his hat was in his hands rather than on his head, a gesture of respect. His eyes met hers, and she saw genuine concern there, along with something else that looked like old grief. "I'm already packed," she said. "I was planning to leave on the noon stage, but you're right. I need to go now." "The stage won't save you if he comes looking in the next hour," Reese said. "And if he's been drinking all night, he's past the point of caring who sees what he does. You need to get out of town completely, somewhere he can't follow easily." "I don't have anywhere to go," Tabitha admitted. "I barely have enough money for the stage ticket to Cheyenne as it is." Reese glanced over his shoulder down the stairs, as if checking to make sure they were still alone. When he looked back at her, there was determination in his expression. "The ranch where I work is always looking for help. The owner's wife needs someone to help with the house and the cooking, especially now with roundup season starting. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and you'd be safe there. Henderson has no reason to come out that way, and even if he did, the boss wouldn't let him cause trouble." Tabitha wanted to ask why this stranger was going so far out of his way for someone he didn't know, but the sound of voices drifting up from the street below made the question irrelevant. She couldn't make out words, but one of the voices sounded like Henderson's, loud and aggressive. Reese heard it too, and his jaw tightened. "We need to go now," he said. "I have my horse at the livery. Can you ride?" "Yes," Tabitha said, though it had been years since she had been on a horse. She pulled the door open wider. "Let me get my things." She grabbed her satchel from the bed and took one last look around the small room that had been her home for 6 months. She had thought she might build a life here, might finally find some stability and peace after the chaos of losing her parents and everything familiar. Instead, she was running again, trusting her safety to a stranger because the devil she knew had proven more dangerous than the one she didn't. Reese took her satchel without asking, slinging it over his shoulder so she could navigate the stairs more easily in her long skirts. He moved quickly but quietly, and Tabitha followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. They reached the bottom of the external stairs and pressed into the shadows against the building. The main street of Wheatland stretched before them, mostly dark and quiet in the pre-dawn gloom. About 100 yards away, outside the saloon, she could see a group of men. Even at this distance and in poor light, she recognized Henderson's bulky silhouette. "The livery is 2 buildings down," Reese whispered. "Stay close and stay quiet." They moved along the side of the mercantile, using the shadows for cover. Tabitha's skirts whispered against the dirt, and she gathered them higher, not caring about propriety when discovery could mean something far worse than scandal. They reached the livery, and Reese led her inside through a side door that he opened with practiced ease. The warm smell of horses and hay surrounded them, and in one of the stalls, a large bay gelding raised its head to watch their entrance. "That's Shadow," Reese said, moving to the horse and beginning to saddle it with efficient movements. "He's steady and strong, and he won't spook easily. We'll ride double until we're well clear of town." Tabitha watched him work, her mind struggling to process how quickly her carefully laid plans had unraveled and reformed into something entirely different. Less than 10 minutes ago, she had been alone in her room, preparing for a solitary escape to an uncertain future. Now she was fleeing in the company of a stranger who claimed to want to help her, riding toward a ranch she had never seen to take a job she hadn't applied for. It should have terrified her more than it did, but something about Reese Sullivan's quiet competence and the genuine concern in his eyes made her feel safer than she had in weeks. He finished with the saddle and turned to her, holding out his hand. "I'll help you mount, then I'll get up behind you. Once we're clear of town, I'll explain everything about the ranch and the work. Right now, we just need to put distance between you and Henderson." Tabitha took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of hard work, and let him help her into the saddle. A moment later, he swung up behind her, settling close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body against her back. One of his arms came around her waist to hold the reins, and she stiffened slightly at the intimacy of the position, before forcing herself to relax. This was necessity, not impropriety, and compared to Henderson's unwanted groping, Reese's touch felt respectful and careful. "Hold on," he said softly, and urged Shadow forward. They exited the livery through the main doors, and Reese guided the horse away from the main street, taking a route through back lots and between buildings. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the deep black giving way to the first hints of gray and purple. They passed the last buildings at the edge of Wheatland and struck out across the open prairie, and only then did Reese let Shadow move faster than a walk. The horse's gait smoothed into an easy lope, and the wind began to rush past Tabitha's face, carrying with it the scent of sage and grass and freedom. She looked back once and saw Wheatland growing smaller behind them, the buildings dark shapes against the lightening sky. Somewhere back there, Henderson was probably discovering her empty room, and she wondered what he would do, what he would think. Part of her felt guilty for leaving without notice, without explanation, but she pushed that feeling away. She owed him nothing, least of all her safety or her dignity. He had made his choice when he decided to see her as something to possess rather than a person to respect. They rode in silence for what felt like an hour, though Tabitha had no way to measure the time. The sun finally broke over the eastern horizon, spilling golden light across the Wyoming landscape, and she found herself struck by the beauty of it despite everything. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, covered in late summer grass that rippled in the wind like waves on an ocean. In the distance, she could see the dark shapes of the Laramie Mountains, and overhead, the sky was turning that particular shade of blue that seemed to exist only in the west. Reese finally slowed Shadow to a walk, and Tabitha felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. They had to be several miles from Wheatland now, far enough that even if Henderson tried to follow, he would have no way of knowing which direction they had gone. "Are you all right?" Reese asked, his voice rumbling from behind her. "I think so," Tabitha said, though her voice shook slightly. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually this much trouble. You must think I'm terribly foolish for getting into such a situation." "I think nothing of the sort," Reese said firmly. "Men like Henderson are good at making their behavior seem like it's somehow the woman's fault. They're good at making you feel like if you just acted differently or dressed differently or spoke differently, they would leave you alone. But that's a lie. The fault is theirs, and theirs alone." His words, so direct and so completely opposite to what she had been telling herself for weeks, made Tabitha's eyes burn with unexpected tears. She blinked them back, not wanting to cry in front of this man who was already doing so much for her. "Thank you," she managed, "for helping me. For believing me without question. Like I said, I've seen what happens when no one helps," Reese said quietly. "I won't let that happen again if I can prevent it." They continued riding, and as the sun climbed higher, Reese began to tell her about the ranch where he worked. It was called the Rolling S, owned by a man named Samuel Thornton and his wife, Martha. They ran about 2,000 head of cattle across several thousand acres and employed 6 regular hands plus additional help during roundup and branding season. Martha Thornton was originally from Ohio and struggled with the isolation and hard work of ranch life, especially now that she was pregnant with their 3rd child. She desperately needed help with cooking and cleaning and watching the 2 children they already had. "Sam's a fair man," Reese said. "He pays decent wages and treats his people right. Martha can be particular about how she wants things done, but she's kind-hearted underneath. Their children are 5 and 3, both boys, full of energy. The work will be hard, but it's honest, and you'll have a room in the main house. Safe and respectable. And you're sure they'll take me on without notice?" Tabitha asked. "I don't want to presume." "Martha's been begging Sam to find someone for 2 months now," Reese said. "Last week she actually cried at dinner because she was so exhausted. Sam's been asking around town, but most of the women in Wheatland are already settled with their own families. You showing up will feel like an answered prayer to both of them." Tabitha absorbed this information, trying to imagine what her life might look like in this new place. It would certainly be different from keeping books in a mercantile, but she wasn't afraid of hard work. Her mother had run a boarding house, and Tabitha had grown up cooking and cleaning and managing all the domestic tasks that came with housing a dozen transient workers. She knew how to make a little food stretch a long way, how to get stains out of laundry, how to keep a house running smoothly. If anything, she was probably more qualified for this kind of work than she had been for bookkeeping. "What about you?" she asked, then immediately wondered if the question was too personal. But Reese didn't seem offended. "What about me?" he asked. "You said you had a sister in Texas. How did you end up in Wyoming?" There was a long pause, and Tabitha thought perhaps she had overstepped after all. But then Reese spoke, his voice careful and measured. "After my sister died, I couldn't stay in Texas. Everything there reminded me of her, and I kept thinking about how I should have been there to protect her, should have done something. I drifted north, picking up work where I could find it. I've been at the Rolling S for about a year now. It's the longest I've stayed anywhere since leaving home." "I'm sorry about your sister," Tabitha said softly. "My parents died last year. Consumption. I understand what it's like to lose family." Then we're both starting over, Reese said, trying to build something new from the pieces of what we lost. The simple truth of his words settled between them, and Tabitha found herself relaxing more fully against him in the saddle. There was something comforting about knowing she wasn't the only one carrying grief, the only one trying to figure out how to move forward when everything familiar had been stripped away. They rode on, and she let herself notice small details about the man behind her. The way he sat so easily in the saddle, as if he had been born on horseback. The gentle way he handled the reins, guiding Shadow with subtle shifts rather than harsh pulls. The respectful distance he maintained even though their position required close contact. The sun was well up when they finally crested a low rise and Reese pointed ahead. "There," he said. "That's the rolling S." Tabitha looked where he indicated and saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The main house was 2 stories, built from logs and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around at least 2 sides. Nearby stood a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the surrounding hills, dark shapes grazing peacefully in the morning sun. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, suggesting someone was already up and starting breakfast. As they rode closer, Tabitha could make out more details. The house showed signs of careful maintenance, with fresh chinking between the logs and neat curtains visible in the windows. A vegetable garden stretched along one side and chickens scratched in a fenced yard. It looked solid and prosperous, the kind of place built to last. A dog began barking as they approached, and by the time they reached the front of the house, a man had emerged onto the porch. He was in his late 30s, Tabitha guessed, with dark hair graying at the temples and the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, but his posture was more curious than threatening. "Reese," the man called out, "you're back early." "I didn't expect you until this afternoon." Reese dismounted and then helped Tabitha down, his hands respectful and steady. "Morning, Sam. I finished the hotel delivery and headed back, but something came up in town. This is Miss Tabitha Emerson. She needs help, and I thought Martha might still be looking for assistance with the house." Sam Thornton's gaze shifted to Tabitha, taking in her disheveled appearance and the single satchel that contained all her worldly possessions. His expression was difficult to read, but he wasn't hostile. "That's so," he said. "Well, you better come inside and explain. Martha's getting breakfast on, and she'll want to hear this." They followed Sam into the house, and Tabitha found herself in a large main room that served as kitchen and living area combined. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the furniture, though simple, was well made and comfortable looking. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air, and at the stove stood a woman with honey blonde hair pulled back in a loose bun. She turned at their entrance, and Tabitha saw a pretty face marked by exhaustion and a body clearly heavy with pregnancy. "Reese, you're back," Martha Thornton said. Then her eyes widened as she noticed Tabitha. "Oh, I didn't know we were expecting company." "Martha, this is Miss Tabitha Emerson," Sam said. "Reese brought her from town. He says she needs help and thought she might be the answer to your prayers about needing someone for the house." Martha's tired eyes brightened with interest, and she moved away from the stove, one hand pressed against her lower back. "Is that so? Miss Emerson, have you had breakfast? Please sit down. You look exhausted." The kindness in her voice, so immediate and genuine, made Tabitha's eyes burn with tears again. She was tired, she realized, bone-deep tired from weeks of worry and fear and a sleepless night spent packing to leave. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very kind." They settled around a large wooden table, and Martha poured coffee while Sam dished up plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits. Reese sat across from Tabitha, and she was grateful for his steady presence as she tried to figure out how much to explain. She didn't want to lie to these people who were showing her such hospitality, but she also didn't want to burden them with the sordid details of Henderson's behavior. Miss Emerson was working as a bookkeeper at Henderson's general store, Reese said, picking up the story when Tabitha hesitated. But Henderson made it clear his interests went beyond her professional services. Last night, I overheard him in the saloon, drinking and making threats about settling things with her this morning. I thought it best to get her out of town before he could make good on those threats. Sam's expression darkened. Henderson's a mean drunk, he said. I've had dealings with him before, and I don't care for the man. You were right to bring Miss Emerson here, Reese. Please call me Tabitha, she said quietly. And I want to be clear that I'm not looking for charity. Reese mentioned that you might need help with the household, Mrs. Thornton, and I'm happy to work for my keep. I grew up helping my mother run a boarding house in Philadelphia. I can cook and clean and manage a household. I'm good with children, and I don't mind hard work. Martha reached across the table and squeezed Tabitha's hand. My dear, you look like you've been through quite an ordeal. Let's not worry about work just yet. Finish your breakfast, and then I'll show you to a room where you can rest. We can discuss the details later. But Tabitha shook her head. I appreciate your kindness, but I'd rather be clear about expectations from the start. I need honest work and a safe place to stay. If you're willing to offer that, I can start earning my keep today. I don't want to be a burden. Sam and Martha exchanged a glance, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Sam nodded. All right, then. Plain speaking is always best. Martha needs help with the house and the children, especially with the baby coming in a couple of months. We can offer you room and board plus $30 a month. The room would be upstairs in the main house, small but private. You'd be expected to help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and minding the boys. The work is hard, and the days are long, but we treat our people fairly. Does that sound acceptable? $30 a month was more than Henderson had paid her, and the offer of a private room was almost too good to be true. Tabitha felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear and uncertainty that had been pulled tight for weeks. More than acceptable, she said. Thank you, both of you. Then it's settled, Martha said, smiling for the first time since Tabitha had entered. Welcome to the Rolling S, Tabitha. I think you're going to be the answer to many prayers around here. They finished breakfast, and then Martha showed Tabitha upstairs to a small room at the back of the house. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the creek and the prairie beyond. It was simple and spare, but it was clean and safe, and it was hers. Tabitha set her satchel on the bed and turned to Martha, who was leaning against the doorframe with one hand on her swollen belly. Thank you, Tabitha said again. You have no idea what this means to me. I think I have some idea, Martha said gently. I came west as a mail-order bride, you know. Left everything I knew in Ohio to marry Sam sight unseen because I needed a better life, and he needed a wife. It's not the same as your situation, but I understand what it's like to be at the mercy of circumstances and dependent on the kindness of strangers. You'll be safe here, Tabitha. I promise you that. After Martha left, Tabitha sank down onto the bed and finally let herself cry. The tears came in great, shaking sobs that she muffled against her hands, releasing all the fear and tension and overwhelming relief that she had been holding back. She had escaped. She was safe. She had a place to stay and honest work and people who seemed genuinely kind. It felt almost too good to be true, and some part of her waited for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. But nothing went wrong. She cried until she had no tears left, then washed her face in the basin on the washstand and changed into a fresh dress. When she went back downstairs, she found Martha in the kitchen kneading bread dough while two small boys played with wooden horses on the floor. The children looked up at her entrance, their eyes bright with curiosity. "Boys, this is Miss Tabitha," Martha said. "She's going to be helping Mama around the house. Can you say hello?" "Hello," the older boy said solemnly. He had his father's dark hair and serious expression. "I'm David and this is Thomas. He's little, so he doesn't talk much yet." Thomas, who looked to be about 3, offered Tabitha a gap-toothed grin and went back to making his wooden horse gallop across the floor. Tabitha knelt down to their level, smiling at both of them. "It's very nice to meet you, David and Thomas. Those are fine horses you have there." David warmed to her immediately, launching into an elaborate explanation of which horse was fastest and which one was the bravest. Tabitha listened with genuine interest, and when Martha looked over and saw her engaging so naturally with the children, the relief on the pregnant woman's face was unmistakable. They fell into a routine over the following days. Tabitha rose early and helped Martha with breakfast, learning the family's preferences and the rhythms of the household. She took over most of the cleaning and laundry, insisting that Martha should rest as much as possible given her advanced pregnancy. She played with David and Thomas, keeping them occupied so Martha could take afternoon naps. In the evenings, she helped prepare dinner for the family and the ranch hands, who ate in shifts at the large table. The ranch hands were a mixed group. Older cowboys who had been working cattle for decades, younger men still learning the trade, and Reese, who seemed to occupy a middle ground. He was respected by the others, Tabitha noticed, trusted with important tasks and deferred to when decisions needed to be made. He was quiet around the house, polite but reserved, and for the first few days they barely spoke beyond basic pleasantries at meals. But on the 4th evening, after dinner was cleared and the other hands had gone back to the bunkhouse, Reese lingered in the kitchen while Tabitha finished washing dishes. Martha and Sam had taken the boys upstairs for bedtime, and the house was quiet except for the sound of water and the clink of plates. "You've settled in well," Reese said from where he leaned against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. Tabitha glanced over her shoulder at him, surprised by the observation. "Martha and Sam have made it easy. They're good people." "They are," Reese agreed. "But I've seen plenty of folks who don't adapt well to ranch life. It's harder and more isolated than most expect. You haven't complained once." "I don't have much to complain about," Tabitha said honestly. "This is the safest I've felt in months. The work is hard, but it's nothing compared to wondering if your employer is going to corner you in the storeroom again." Reese's jaw tightened at the mention of Henderson, and he straightened from the doorframe. "I went back to Wheatland yesterday with Sam for supplies. I heard Henderson's been asking around about you, telling people you stole from him and ran off in the night." Tabitha's hands stilled in the dishwater. "That's not true. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine." "I know that," Reese said quickly. "Sam knows it too. He made it clear to anyone who would listen that you're working here now and under his protection. Henderson won't trouble you here, Tabitha. I promise you that." The way he said her name, so gentle and certain, made something flutter in her chest. She turned to face him fully, drying her hands on her apron. "Why are you doing this? Helping me, I mean. You barely know me." Reese was quiet for a long moment, and in the lamplight, his face was all plains and shadows. "Maybe because I couldn't help my sister, and helping you feels like it matters. Or maybe because when I saw you in that room with your bag half-packed and fear in your eyes, you reminded me that there are still things in this world worth protecting." He paused, then added softly, Or maybe because from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you, and I couldn't walk away even if I wanted to." The honesty in his words stole Tabitha's breath. She had been so focused on survival, on finding safety and stability, that she hadn't let herself think about anything else. But standing here in the quiet kitchen with Reese looking at her like she was something precious, she felt the first stirrings of something that went beyond gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Reese replied. "I'm not expecting anything from you, Tabitha. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone here. If you need anything, if you're worried about Henderson or anything else, you can come to me." "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." He nodded and settled his hat back on his head. "Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Reese." He left through the kitchen door, and Tabitha watched through the window as he crossed the yard to the bunkhouse. She stood there for a long time after he disappeared from view, her hands pressed against the windowsill, feeling the echo of his words in her chest. "Something in me recognized something in you." She didn't quite know what to do with that, but she knew she wanted to understand it better. The days continued to pass, flowing into weeks, and Tabitha found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life more completely than she would have thought possible. She learned to time the bread baking so it came out of the oven just as the men came in for dinner, filling the house with warmth and the smell of yeast. She learned which of the hands liked their coffee strong enough to strip paint and which preferred it weak. She learned that David was afraid of thunderstorms but tried to hide it, and that Thomas would only eat his vegetables if she cut them into tiny pieces and called them treasure. She also learned about Reese, though not from him directly. The other ranch hands were happy to talk, especially old Charlie, who had been working cattle since before Tabitha was born. He told her how Reese had arrived at the Rolling S a year ago, quiet and haunted-looking, willing to work harder than anyone else. How he had slowly earned everyone's respect through his skill with horses and his willingness to take on the difficult jobs without complaint. How Sam had promoted him to lead hand within 6 months, a position usually reserved for men who had been with an outfit for years. "That boy's got demons," Charlie said one afternoon while Tabitha was bringing water out to the men working on fence repair. "You can see it in his eyes sometimes, but he's fighting them, working them out through sweat and determination. I respect that." Tabitha thought about those words often, especially when she saw Reese around the ranch. He was always working, always busy, as if staying in motion was the only way to keep the grief at bay. But sometimes, in the evenings after dinner, she would catch him sitting on the porch, looking out at the prairie with such loneliness on his face that it made her heart ache. One evening, about 3 weeks after she had arrived at the Rolling S, she brought him a cup of coffee and sat down in the other rocking chair without asking permission. He looked surprised but not displeased, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. "Can I ask you about your sister?" Tabitha said eventually. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but sometimes it helps to talk about the people we've lost, to remember them." Reese was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and rough. "Her name was Rose. She was 2 years younger than me, and she was the kindest person I've ever known. Always seeing the best in people, always believing that good would prevail. Our parents died when I was 19 and she was 17, and I promised them I would take care of her. I thought I was doing a good job. I got work on a ranch near San Antonio, and Rose got a job in town working for a dressmaker. She was happy, or so I thought." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. Tabitha waited, giving him time. "There was a man," Reese continued, "the son of one of the wealthy ranchers in the area. He started coming around the dress shop, paying attention to Rose bringing her gifts. She was flattered by it at first. She told me he was courting her and I was happy for her. I should have paid more attention. Should have noticed that she was getting quieter, more withdrawn. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was too late. "What happened?" Tabitha asked gently. He thought because he came from money and she was just a working girl, he had a right to her. When she made it clear she wasn't interested in the kind of relationship he wanted, he got angry. He cornered her one night when she was closing up the shop. There was a struggle. She hit her head on the corner of a table. His voice broke. By the time someone found her the next morning, she was gone. Tabitha reached over and took his hand without thinking, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm so sorry, Reese." "They ruled it an accident," Reese said bitterly. His family had influence and there were no witnesses. He claimed she had invited him there, that what happened was just a tragic accident during a romantic encounter. They painted her as a girl who had gotten in over her head, playing with fire. It made me sick. I wanted to kill him, Tabitha. I spent weeks planning it, figuring out how I could make him pay for what he did. But in the end, I realized that wouldn't bring Rose back. It would just make me a killer. So I left instead, ran away like a coward. "You're not a coward," Tabitha said firmly. "You chose not to destroy yourself with revenge. That takes more strength than pulling a trigger." Reese looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears in the fading light. "Sometimes I wonder. Sometimes I think I should have made him pay, should have at least tried." "Your sister wouldn't have wanted that," Tabitha said. "If she was as kind as you say, she would have wanted you to live, to find peace. Killing him would have taken that away from you forever." They sat in silence, their hands still linked, and watched the last light fade from the sky. Tabitha felt the weight of Reese's grief, understood now why he had been so determined to help her, why he couldn't walk away when he heard Henderson making threats. She squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, and something deepened between them that went beyond words. After that evening, they began spending more time together. Reese would find excuses to be near the house during the day, offering to help with tasks that needed a man's strength, like hauling water or moving heavy furniture. Tabitha would make sure to save him the biggest portion at meals, remembering how he liked his coffee. They would talk on the porch in the evenings, sharing stories about their childhoods, their families, their dreams for the future. Tabitha told him about growing up in the boarding house, about the parade of temporary residents who had passed through her life, about her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's quiet strength. Reese told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the sister who had followed him everywhere and looked at him like he hung the moon. The other people at the ranch noticed, of course. Martha would smile knowingly when she saw them together, and Sam would shake his head in amusement. The ranch hands teased Reese good-naturedly, but there was approval in their ribbing. Tabitha was good people, they said, and Reese deserved some happiness after the year he had been carrying his grief. The first frost came in late September, and with it, the knowledge that winter would be arriving soon. Sam began making preparations, ensuring they had enough hay stored for the cattle and wood split for the stoves. Martha grew larger and more uncomfortable, and Tabitha took over almost all the household duties, insisting that Martha rest as much as possible. The baby was due in October, and everyone was waiting with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. It was on a crisp morning in early October that Martha's labor began. Tabitha was making breakfast when Martha appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale and drawn, one hand pressed against her belly. "I think it's time," she said simply. The household erupted into organized chaos. Sam sent one of the hands racing to town to fetch the midwife. though everyone knew it would be hours before she could arrive. Tabitha helped Martha upstairs and got her settled in bed, remembering everything her mother had told her about childbirth from years of housing pregnant women at the boarding house. She boiled water, gathered clean linens, and tried to project calm confidence even though her heart was racing. The labor was long and difficult. Martha was exhausted before it even truly began, worn down by months of managing the household while heavily pregnant. As the hours dragged on and the midwife still hadn't arrived, Tabitha began to worry in earnest. She held Martha's hand through the contractions, wiped her face with cool cloths, and murmured encouragement even when Martha cried that she couldn't do it anymore. Downstairs, Sam paced the main room like a caged animal, and Reese tried to distract David and Thomas by taking them outside to do chores. But even the boys could sense something momentous was happening, and they were clingy and frightened by their mother's cries. It was late afternoon when the baby finally came, arriving just minutes before the midwife's wagon appeared in the yard. Tabitha found herself holding a tiny, squalling infant, her hands shaking with relief and wonder as she wrapped the baby girl in clean blankets. Martha was crying, exhausted but relieved, reaching for her daughter with trembling arms. "She's beautiful," Tabitha whispered, carefully placing the baby in Martha's arms. "You did so well." The midwife bustled in and took over, checking both mother and baby with practiced efficiency. She pronounced them both healthy, though Martha needed rest and careful monitoring for the next few days. Tabitha cleaned up the room, working quietly while Martha dozed with her daughter in her arms. When she finally went downstairs, she found Sam sitting at the table with his head in his hands, Reese standing beside him with one hand on his shoulder. "It's a girl," Tabitha said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "Mother and baby are both doing well." Sam's head jerked up, his face flooding with relief. "Martha's all right. The baby's healthy. Both fine," Tabitha confirmed. "The midwife is with them now, but she says everything looks good. You can go up and see them in a few minutes." Sam stood and pulled Tabitha into a fierce hug, startling her. "Thank you," he said roughly. "God knows what would have happened if you hadn't been here. Thank you, Tabitha." She hugged him back, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I'm glad I could help." When Sam released her and headed upstairs, Tabitha found herself swaying on her feet, the adrenaline that had kept her going for hours suddenly draining away. Reese was there immediately, his arm around her waist, guiding her to a chair. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Tabitha tried to remember and couldn't. Breakfast, maybe. That had been more than 12 hours ago. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You're not fine, you're exhausted," Reese said. He moved to the stove and began dishing up food that someone, probably him, had kept warm. "You need to eat and then you need to rest. You've been on your feet all day taking care of Martha." He set a plate in front of her, and Tabitha realized she was ravenous. She ate while Reese sat across from her, watching to make sure she finished everything. When she was done, he walked her to the bottom of the stairs. "Go rest," he said softly. "I'll watch the boys and make sure everything is taken care of down here." Tabitha wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She climbed the stairs to her small room, barely managing to take off her shoes before collapsing onto the bed. She fell asleep within seconds and didn't wake until the next morning. The following weeks were a blur of activity as Tabitha took over running the household while Martha recovered from childbirth and adjusted to caring for a newborn. The baby, named Sarah, was a good-natured infant who rarely cried, but she still required constant attention. Tabitha found herself juggling cooking, cleaning, and caring for David and Thomas while also helping Martha with the baby whenever she could. It was exhausting but also deeply satisfying. She had never realized how much she enjoyed being part of a family, even if she was technically just an employee. Reese became her partner in managing everything. He would take the boys outside after breakfast, keeping them occupied for hours so Tabitha could focus on household tasks. He fixed things that broke, hauled heavy loads, and generally made himself indispensable. In the evenings, after the boys were in bed and Martha was settled with the baby, he and Tabitha would collapse on the porch together, too tired to talk much but finding comfort in each other's presence. It was during one of those quiet evenings in late October that Reese finally said what had been building between them for weeks. They were sitting in the rocking chairs, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tabitha had her eyes closed, drifting in that space between waking and sleeping, when Reese's voice brought her back. "Tabitha." She opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I need to tell you something," he continued, his voice low and serious. "And I understand if it's not what you want to hear, but I can't keep it to myself anymore." Tabitha's heart began to beat faster. "All right. I'm in love with you," Reese said simply. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you in that room above the mercantile, scared but determined to save yourself. And every day since then, watching you care for this family, watching you build a life here, I've fallen deeper. I know it hasn't been very long, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You deserve to know." Tabitha stared at him, her mind racing. She had known something was growing between them, had felt the connection deepening with every conversation, every shared glance, every moment of comfortable silence. But hearing him say it out loud, claiming it so openly, made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "The last man who claimed to care about me tried to force himself on me. I don't know if I can trust my own judgment anymore." "I would never hurt you," Reese said fiercely. "I would rather cut off my own hand than lay it on you in anger or force. But I understand if you need time, if you need to be certain. I'm not going anywhere, Tabitha. I'll wait as long as it takes." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the man who had risked Henderson's wrath to help a stranger, who had given her a chance at a new life, who had been patient and kind and steadfast for weeks. She thought about how he made her laugh, how he listened when she talked, how he respected her opinions and valued her work. She thought about how safe she felt around him, how her heart lifted every time she saw him coming across the yard. "I don't think you need to wait," she said softly. "I think I've been falling in love with you too. I was just too scared to admit it." The smile that spread across Reese's face was like sunrise, transforming his usually serious expression into something radiant. He stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. He took her hand in both of his touch gentle and reverent. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. Tabitha's answer was to lean forward and press her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet, tentative at first but deepening as they both relaxed into it. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking gently across her skin, and she felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless and smiling. "I want to do this right," Reese said, still kneeling beside her chair. "I want to court you properly, give you time to be sure. And when you're ready, when we're both ready, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you, Tabitha. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to be the man you turn to when you're happy or sad or scared. I want to be your partner in everything." Tears spilled down Tabitha's cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." They sat together on the porch until the cold drove them inside, talking about their future, making plans and dreams. When they finally said goodnight at the bottom of the stairs, Reese kissed her again, slow and deep, and Tabitha felt like she was floating as she climbed to her room. The next morning, they told Sam and Martha over breakfast. The couple's delight was immediate and genuine, with Martha crying happy tears and Sam clapping Reese on the back so hard he nearly knocked him into the table. Even David and Thomas seemed to understand that something good was happening, and they bounced around the kitchen with excitement. "I think this calls for a celebration," Sam declared. "We'll have a party on Sunday, invite some of the neighboring ranches. It's been too long since we had a reason to celebrate something happy." The days leading up to Sunday were filled with preparation. Tabitha baked pies and cakes, roasted chickens, and prepared side dishes until the kitchen table groaned under the weight of food. Martha, still recovering but determined to participate, made a special dress for baby Sarah and helped David and Thomas get cleaned up and presentable. Reese and the other ranch hands cleaned the barn and set up tables and chairs for the guests. Sunday dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect autumn days that made Wyoming seem like paradise. Neighbors began arriving around noon, families from the surrounding ranches bringing more food and good wishes. There was music and dancing, children running wild in the yard, and a feeling of community that made Tabitha's heart swell. She found herself surrounded by women welcoming her into their circle, sharing advice about ranch life and marriage, offering friendship without judgment or question. Reese barely left her side, his pride in their relationship evident in the way he introduced her to everyone as his intended. They danced together in the barn, swaying to the music played by one of the neighbors on his fiddle, and Tabitha felt happier than she had in years. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it: belonging, safety, love, and a place to call home. As the sun began to set and families started heading home, Sam stood and called for everyone's attention. "Before you all leave, I want to say something," he announced. "Martha and I came to Wyoming 10 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. We've built something here, something we're proud of, but we couldn't have done it alone. We've been blessed with good neighbors and good friends and good people who work for us. And now, we're blessed to welcome Tabitha into our family and to celebrate her engagement to Reese, who's been like a brother to me this past year." To Reese and Tabitha, everyone raised their glasses, echoing the toast, and Tabitha felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. Reese pulled her close, kissing her temple, and whispered, "I love you," against her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. They set their wedding date for December, wanting to give themselves time to prepare properly but not wanting to wait too long. The weeks between the engagement party and the wedding flew by in a flurry of activity. Tabitha worked with Martha to make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored wool that would be practical for a winter wedding. Reese began building furniture for the small cabin Sam was giving them as a wedding gift, a 2-room structure about a quarter-mile from the main house that would be their first home together. The weather turned cold and snowy in November, and Tabitha found herself grateful for the warm house and the good company. She continued her work caring for Martha's family, but now there was also planning for her own household to consider. She made lists of supplies they would need, linens and dishes and cooking implements. Martha gifted her some things from her own stores, and the ranch hands pooled their money to buy them a beautiful cast iron stove for the cabin. Reese was building more than just furniture. He was building them a life, Tabitha realized, pouring all his skill and care into creating a home they could be proud of. He made a bed frame from smooth pine, a table and chairs from oak, shelves for her books and his tools. He installed a window that looked out toward the mountains and built a porch where they could sit on summer evenings. She would visit the cabin and watch him work, bringing him lunch and marveling at how the empty space was transforming into something real and solid. "I want you to be happy here," he told her one afternoon as they stood inside the cabin, surveying his progress. "I want you to feel safe and loved every single day of our lives together." "I already do," Tabitha said, wrapping her arms around his waist and leaning her head against his chest. "You make me feel safe, Reese. You make me feel valued and respected and cherished. I never thought I would find this, especially not after everything that happened with Henderson. But you've shown me that not all men are like him, that love can be gentle and good and true." He held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice in trusting me. I promise you that, Tabitha." They were married on a snowy Saturday in mid-December, in the main room of the ranch house with all their friends and neighbors gathered around. The local preacher performed the ceremony, and Tabitha wore her cream wool dress with a crown of dried wildflowers that Martha had saved from the summer. Reese wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut, and his face cleanly shaved, and the look in his eyes when he saw her walking down the makeshift aisle made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They exchanged vows in front of the fireplace, promising to love and honor and cherish each other through whatever life brought their way. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Reese he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was both joyful and reverent, sealing the promise they had made. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Tabitha laughed against Reese's mouth, giddy with happiness. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with more food than anyone could possibly eat and dancing that left everyone exhausted and happy. David and Thomas were wild with excitement, running around in their Sunday clothes and eating far too much cake. Baby Sarah slept through most of it, content in her mother's arms. As the night wore on and guests began to leave, calling out final congratulations and well wishes, Tabitha found herself standing with Reese on the porch, watching the snow fall in the lamplight. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Sullivan?" Reese asked, his arm around her waist. Mrs. Sullivan. Her new name felt strange and wonderful, like putting on a coat that fit perfectly. "More than ready," she said. They walked through the snow to their cabin, following the path that Reese had shoveled clear that morning. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently in the middle of their new home. A fire was already burning in the stove, filling the small space with warmth, and lamps cast a golden glow over the furniture Reese had built with his own hands. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a careful exploration of each other that was built on trust and love rather than obligation or expectation. Reese was patient and gentle, checking in with her constantly to make sure she was comfortable and happy. Tabitha had been nervous, the memories of Henderson's unwanted touches making her tense, but Reese's careful consideration and obvious love for her helped her relax. When they finally came together, it felt right and good and holy, a physical expression of the emotional connection they had built over the past months. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed Reese had made, warm under heavy quilts while snow fell outside. Tabitha rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt peace settle over her like a blessing. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Reese asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "For saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." He kissed the top of her head. "You saved yourself, Tabitha. You were already packing to leave when I showed up. I just offered you a different destination. Everything else, all of this, You built that with your own strength and courage." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, content and happy and home. Their first year of marriage was marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the seasons changing. Winter gradually gave way to spring, and Tabitha discovered she was pregnant just as the prairie began to green. The news filled them both with joy and a little fear, remembering how difficult Martha's labor had been, but the pregnancy progressed smoothly. Tabitha continued to help Martha with the household while also maintaining her own home, finding satisfaction in the domestic work that had once seemed like drudgery when she was doing it alone in Philadelphia. Reese continued his work on the ranch, but now he came home to her every evening, and they would share dinner and talk about their days. He told her about the cattle and the horses, about the challenges of managing grazing land and water rights. She told him about the garden she was planning, about the curtains she was sewing for their windows, about the way she could feel the baby moving inside her. They were building a life together, creating something that was uniquely theirs. In late summer, just as the prairie grasses were turning gold, Tabitha went into labor. This time the midwife arrived early and Martha was there to help, and the birth, while painful and difficult, was manageable. When Tabitha finally held her son in her arms, she looked up at Reese, who was crying unashamedly, and felt her heart expand with love so intense it was almost painful. "He's perfect," Reese breathed, gently touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Reese's father, and he became the center of their universe. Reese was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Tabitha watched him with their child and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentleness and care he brought to fatherhood. The years passed, marked by the births of 2 more children. A daughter they named Rose, after Reese's sister, and another son they called Matthew. The cabin that had seemed so spacious for 2 people grew crowded with 5, and Reese added 2 more rooms, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. Tabitha's days were full of cooking and cleaning and caring for children, but she was happy in a way she had never imagined possible back in Philadelphia, or even during her brief time in Wheatland. Sam and Martha's family grew as well, with 2 more children born over the years. The 2 families became deeply intertwined, with the children growing up together like cousins, running wild across the ranch and learning the skills they would need to thrive in the West. David and Thomas treated Tabitha's children like younger siblings, teaching them to ride and rope and all the other skills of ranch life. Sarah grew into a sweet-natured girl who loved helping with the younger children. Reese eventually became Sam's partner in the ranch, the 2 men working together to expand their operation and improve their herd. The Rolling S prospered under their joint management, becoming known throughout Wyoming for the quality of their cattle and the fairness with which they treated their employees. Tabitha took pride in her husband's success, knowing how hard he worked and how much he had overcome to get here. Sometimes, lying in bed at night with Reese beside her and their children sleeping in nearby rooms, Tabitha would think back to that pre-dawn morning when she had been packing to leave Wheatland, terrified and alone and certain she had no good options. She would remember the knock on her door, Reese's voice offering help, the decision to trust a stranger that had changed the entire course of her life. She had been prepared to run, to keep running maybe forever, always looking over her shoulder and never feeling safe. Instead, she had found home. She had found love. She had found a partner who valued her and respected her and built a life with her based on mutual trust and affection. She had found safety and stability and purpose. She had found everything she had been searching for without knowing it. One evening in late fall, about 10 years after they had first met, Tabitha and Reese sat on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie. The children were inside, supposedly doing their evening chores but more likely playing. From the cabin, they could hear laughter and the sound of someone practicing the fiddle, hitting more wrong notes than right. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door that morning?" Reese asked quietly. Tabitha leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the silence they had built together over years of marriage. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I think about where I would have ended up, what kind of life I would have had. Nothing good, probably. I was so lost back then." "You were strong," Reese corrected. "You were saving yourself. I just offered you a different path." "You offered me everything," Tabitha said, turning to look at him. The years had added some gray to his hair and lines around his eyes, but he was still the man who had risked everything to help a stranger, still the man who had promised to keep her safe and had spent every day since making good on that promise. "You offered me a life, Reese. A real life, full of love and family and purpose. You saw me when I felt invisible. You protected me when I felt vulnerable. You loved me when I didn't think I deserved to be loved." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch still gentle after all these years. "You always deserved to be loved. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were someone special, someone worth fighting for." "I was packing to leave at sunrise," Tabitha whispered, echoing words she had thought to herself so many times over the years. "And you showed up and said, 'Unpack your bags and pack your life with mine.' And I did, and it's been the best decision I ever made." "Mine too," Reese said, and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of the love they had built together over a decade of marriage. Inside, one of the children called for them, needing help with something, and they pulled apart with matching smiles. Life was calling, their beautiful, chaotic, love-filled life, and they went to answer it together, partners in everything just as they had promised on that snowy December day when they had spoken their vows. The years continued to unfold, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. There were harsh winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low and water was scarce. There were years when beef prices dropped and money was tight, years when illness swept through the territory and everyone held their breath praying their children would be spared. But through it all, Tabitha and Reese faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. They watched their children grow into young adults who were capable and confident, raised with the values of hard work and integrity that both parents held dear. James grew tall and serious like his father, naturally taking on leadership roles on the ranch. Rose was gentle and artistic, more interested in books and drawing than cattle, but she helped her mother manage the household with cheerful efficiency. Matthew was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and adventures, keeping everyone on their toes. Sam and Martha's children grew up alongside them, and the two families remained close, their lives intertwined in ways both practical and emotional. When Sam's health began to fail in his 60s, it was natural that Reese would take over full management of the ranch. And when Reese and Tabitha's own children began to marry and have children of their own, it was natural that they would build homes on rolling land, keeping the family together. Tabitha became a grandmother in her 40s, welcoming James's son into the world with joy and the wisdom that came from having raised 3 children of her own. She held the tiny baby and thought about the cycle of life, about how the scared young woman who had fled Wheatland had become this, a grandmother, a matriarch, a woman with a family and a legacy. It felt almost miraculous. One summer evening, when Tabitha was in her early 50s and Reese was approaching 60, They took a rare moment to themselves and rode out to a spot on the ranch that had always been special to them. It was a high point overlooking the creek, with views that stretched for miles in every direction. They had come here often in the early years of their marriage, stealing time alone away from the demands of work and family. They hadn't been here in years, and Tabitha had forgotten how beautiful it was. They dismounted and stood side by side, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The prairie grass rippled in the wind, and in the distance, they could see the ranch buildings, smoke rising from chimneys as families prepared evening meals. "We built something good, didn't we?" Reese said, his arm around her waist. Tabitha leaned into him, comfortable in his presence after more than 30 years together. "We built something wonderful. A family, a home, a legacy. Our children are happy and healthy. Our grandchildren are growing strong. The ranch is prospering. We have friends and neighbors who respect us. We have each other." "I still can't believe you took a chance on me," Reese said softly. "That morning when I knocked on your door, you could have sent me away. You could have refused to trust me. Your whole life would have been different." "My whole life would have been worse," Tabitha said firmly. "You saved me, Reese. Not just from Henderson, but from a life of fear and loneliness and running. You gave me roots when I had none. You gave me love when I didn't think I would ever find it. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to wake up smiling every morning." "You gave me all those things too," Reese said, turning her to face him. His hair was more gray than dark now, and his face was deeply lined from years of sun and wind, but his eyes were still the same, still full of the love and intensity that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "You gave me a reason to stop running from my grief. You gave me hope for the future. You gave me children and grandchildren and a full, rich life that I never thought I would have after Rose died. You healed me, Tabitha." "We healed each other," Tabitha said, reaching up to cup his weathered face. "That's what love does. It takes two broken people and makes them whole." They stood there as the sun disappeared and stars began to emerge, holding each other and reflecting on the long, winding road that had brought them to this moment. Tabitha thought about the girl she had been, packing her bag in a rented room above a mercantile, terrified and alone and desperate for escape. She thought about Reese, haunted by guilt and grief, drifting from place to place trying to outrun his demons. Two lost souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. "You have any regrets?" Reese asked quietly. Tabitha didn't hesitate. "Not a single one. My life has been exactly what it was supposed to be, and I wouldn't change a moment of it. Not even the hard parts, the winters when we didn't know if we would make it through, the times when money was so tight we could barely afford supplies, the scares when the children were sick. Not even those," Tabitha said, "because we faced them together and they made us stronger. They taught us what really matters, and they make moments like this, peaceful and happy, even more precious because we know how hard won they are." They rode back to the ranch as darkness fell, comfortable in the silence and in each other's company. When they reached their home, now expanded into a substantial house that could accommodate visiting grandchildren, they found their daughter Rose had come for a visit with her husband and two children. The house was full of noise and laughter and life, and Tabitha moved through it with ease born of decades of practice, helping prepare a late supper and settling the grandchildren for the night. Later in their bedroom, she and Reese lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their family around them. It was crowded and chaotic and perfect, everything they had built together over more than 3 decades of marriage. "I love you," Reese whispered, pulling her close. "I love you too," Tabitha whispered back, always and forever. They had faced down challenges that would have broken weaker partnerships. They had built a life from nothing but hope and determination and love. They had raised children and welcomed grandchildren, and created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And through it all, they had remained committed to each other, partners in the truest sense of the word. As Tabitha drifted off to sleep, warm and safe in her husband's arms, she offered up a silent prayer of gratitude for the morning Reese Sullivan had knocked on her door, for the courage she had found to trust him, for every single day they had been given together. She had been packing to leave at sunrise, ready to run toward an uncertain future. And he had shown up and invited her to unpack her bags and pack her life with his instead. It had been the best decision she ever made, and she had never looked back with anything but joy and gratitude. Their love story had started in desperation and fear, but it had grown into something strong and enduring and beautiful. It was a testament to the power of trust, the strength of commitment, and the healing that could come from two people choosing to face life together rather than alone. Years continued to pass, each one adding more texture and depth to the tapestry of their lives. Tabitha and Reese grew old together gracefully, their hair turning white and their bodies slowing down, but their minds remaining sharp and their love remaining constant. They watched their children become the pillars of the community, respected and successful in their own rights. They watched their grandchildren grow up and begin having children of their own, making Tabitha and Reese great-grandparents. The Wyoming Territory became the state of Wyoming, and the wild frontier of their youth gradually gave way to something more settled and civilized. Towns grew larger, railroads expanded, and the isolation that had once defined ranch life became less severe. But some things never changed. The endless sweep of the prairie, the hard work required to raise cattle, the importance of family and community, the value of keeping your word. Tabitha continued to be the heart of their family, the one everyone turned to for advice and comfort. She taught her granddaughters to cook and sew, and manage households. She told stories about the old days, about coming west as a young woman and building a life from nothing. She passed down the silver-backed brush that had been her mother's, giving it to Rose on her wedding day with tears in her eyes. She created traditions and rituals that bound the family together, annual gatherings and celebrations that everyone looked forward to. Reese remained active on the ranch well into his 70s, refusing to fully retire even when his children begged him to take it easier. He loved the work, loved being outside, loved feeling useful and productive. He taught his grandsons everything he knew about horses and cattle and the land. He passed down the skills that had sustained his family for decades, ensuring they wouldn't be lost. And every evening, no matter how tired he was, he came home to Tabitha and they sat together on their porch, holding hands and watching the sun set, just as they had done for more than 40 years. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, neighbors, and friends all gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed a small army. Person after person stood up to toast Reese and Tabitha, speaking about their love and commitment, about the example they had set, about the family they had built. When it was Reese's turn to speak, he stood with Tabitha beside him, her hand in his, and looked out at the crowd of people they had created and influenced. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I knocked on the door of a scared young woman who was packing to leave at sunrise. I told her to unpack her bags and pack her life with mine instead. And somehow, miraculously, she said yes. Everything you see here, all of this family and love and legacy, started with that decision. Tabitha Sullivan is the bravest person I have ever known, and I have been blessed beyond measure to spend my life with her. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd, and when Tabitha stood on her toes to kiss her husband, everyone erupted in cheers and applause. They were a living testament to the power of love, to the beauty of commitment, to the strength that came from two people choosing each other every single day for 5 decades. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, Tabitha and Reese slipped away from the crowd and walked, slowly now with age, to their special spot overlooking the creek. They stood there in the fading light, wrapped in each other's arms, and reflected on the incredible journey they had taken together. "No regrets?" Reese asked, echoing the question he had asked years before. "Not a single one," Tabitha confirmed. "You?" "Only that we don't have another 50 years, Reese said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to spend forever with you, and even 50 years isn't enough." "Then we'll make the most of whatever time we have left," Tabitha said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "We'll keep choosing each other, keep loving each other, keep building this beautiful life we've created. And when our time is done, we'll leave behind something that will outlast us both. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, they'll carry our love forward into the future." They stayed there until the stars emerged, the same stars they had watched together for half a century. And when they finally walked back to the house, moving slowly but steadily, they did so hand in hand, partners still in every way that mattered. Tabitha Sullivan lived to be 82 years old, surrounded by family to the very end. When she passed peacefully in her sleep, Reese was beside her, holding her hand as he had for more than 55 years of marriage. He mourned her deeply, but found comfort in their children and the incredible legacy they had built together. He lived another 3 years, long enough to see another great-grandchild born, another generation carrying forward the Sullivan name and the values he and Tabitha had worked so hard to instill. When Reese joined his beloved wife in the cemetery that overlooked the rolling S Ranch, their children made sure they were buried side by side, their headstones marking the resting place of a love that had endured every challenge and emerged stronger for it. The inscription on Tabitha's headstone read, "She unpacked her bags and packed her life with his." The inscription on Reese's read, "He showed her that love could be gentle and good and true." The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, becoming a place of legacy and history in Wyoming. The cabin where Reese and Tabitha had started their married life was preserved and maintained, becoming a symbol of where it all began. Family members would bring their own children there, telling them the story of the scared young woman and the cowboy who had saved her, of how their love had created everything that followed. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the prairie and the sun set over the mountains, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear echoes of their laughter, remnants of their love, whispers of the vows they had made to each other on a snowy December day more than half a century before. They had started with nothing but hope and trust, and they had built something that would endure for generations. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West but timeless in its message. That love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth building a life around, worth choosing every single day. That two people who had been broken by their pasts could come together and create something whole and beautiful. That home wasn't a place but a person, and family wasn't just blood but the bonds you chose to build and maintain. Tabitha and Reese Sullivan had lived their lives with integrity and love and commitment. They had faced challenges that would have destroyed lesser partnerships, and they had emerged stronger every time. They had built a family that would carry their values forward into the future. They had loved each other with a depth and constancy that became legendary in their community. And it all started with a knock on a door before sunrise, with a cowboy asking a frightened woman to trust him, with two lost souls finding each other at exactly the right moment and choosing to face the future together rather than alone. It was a simple decision that changed everything, a moment of courage and faith that rippled out across decades, touching hundreds of lives and creating a legacy that would never be forgotten. The Rolling S Ranch still stands today, now run by the sixth generation of the Sullivan family. And on the mantel in the main house, there sits a silver-backed brush that has been passed down through the women of the family for over a century, a tangible link to the woman who started it all. Beside it is a photograph, faded and worn but carefully preserved, showing a young couple on their wedding day. He is tall and serious, with eyes full of love and determination. She is beautiful and brave, with a smile that suggests she knows exactly how blessed she is. They are Reese and Tabitha Sullivan, and theirs is a love story that will be told for generations to come. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, when you are packing to leave at sunrise with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, love can find you. And when it does, if you are brave enough to trust it, it can transform your entire life into something more beautiful than you ever imagined possible.